The mirror caught her reflection as Emily Parker stood in her small apartment, running a nervous hand over the soft blue dress she had chosen. It wasn't new, but it carried just enough simplicity to keep her grounded and just enough elegance to suggest she cared. She hadn't gone on a date in nearly a year. The thought of meeting a stranger, someone whose face she had only known through filtered photos and hurried messages, made her pulse quicken. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A message from Chloe lit the screen. Chloe, don't overthink it, Em. You deserve this. Just have fun. Emily smiled faintly and typed back, if he's a creep, I'll fake a call from the hospital. Nurse's privilege. The exchange steadied her nerves. Still, a quiet unease threaded itself through her chest. She grabbed her bag, slipped on her coat, and locked the door behind her. The restaurant glowed warmly in the evening air, fairy lights strung across the entrance. Daniel was already waiting just as he promised. He rose from the table when she arrived, tall, well-dressed, with a disarming smile that seemed both practiced and sincere. Emily? He asked, extending a hand. His voice carried a calm, steady warmth. She nodded, shaking his hand. Daniel, sorry if I'm late. You're right on time, he said, pulling out her chair. The first few minutes flowed with the nervous chatter of strangers testing the waters. Work, favorite foods, childhood memories. Emily noticed the way his eyes lingered on her a beat too long, as if memorizing her face. When she laughed, his expression softened, though something about the sharpness in his gaze unsettled her. The waiter came and went, glasses of wine appearing, plates of food steaming with quiet comfort. Daniel was charming, almost too charming. He knew how to keep the conversation alive, weaving questions that made Emily feel seen but also exposed. He's interesting. We'll call tomorrow. But there would be no call tomorrow. The silence of the next morning would be the first crack in the fragile world Emily left behind. The alarm on Emily's nightstand buzzed against the silence of her apartment, vibrating until it finally stilled. No hand reached out to silence it. No hurried footsteps padded across the floor as they always did when she prepared for her morning shift. The bed remained neatly made, the blue dress from the night before draped carelessly over a chair, as if waiting for someone who never returned. At the hospital, nurses shuffled into the ward with their usual rhythm. Clipboards in hand, coffee cups steaming. Chloe, balancing her mug, noticed Emily's absence immediately. She frowned at the clock. 7:30. Emily was punctual to the point of irritation, the kind who arrived 10 minutes early and scolded others for being late. Maybe traffic, Chloe muttered under her breath. But even as she said it, the words felt hollow. By 8:30, with no call, Chloe's unease began to take root. She stepped aside in the break room, pulling out her phone and dialing Emily. It rang once, then switched to voicemail. Hey, it's me, Chloe said, forcing a lightness she didn't feel. Running late? Call me when you can. She hung up, shaking her head. A bad night out, maybe. A hangover. But Emily wasn't the type to let work slide, not even for a pounding headache. Hours passed. Each time Chloe checked her phone, the silence deepened. No reply. No read receipts. Just the same cold voicemail message, as though Emily had slipped quietly out of the world. By lunchtime, Chloe's irritation had turned to worry. She cornered another nurse. Have you heard from Emily today? The nurse shook her head. No, didn't she have the early shift? Yeah, Chloe muttered, pressing her lips together. She never misses. The afternoon dragged. Chloe dialed again and again, each call collapsing into the same empty message. The sound of Emily's recorded voice, cheerful, distracted, alive, began to feel like an echo from another life. By the time her shift ended, Chloe could no longer push the unease away. She stepped outside into the fading daylight, gripping her phone with cold fingers. She typed a message and deleted it, then tried again. Chloe. Em, I'm worried. Please call me. Even just a text. Anything. She hit send. Watched the screen. Nothing. Driving home, Chloe replayed their last exchange in her head. Emily's message from the night before. It was good. He's interesting. We'll call tomorrow. The words replayed like a haunting refrain. Why hadn't she called? Why hadn't she texted back? At a red light, Chloe's chest tightened. What if something happened? She shook her head, forcing the thought away. Emily was strong, cautious, careful to a fault. But then again, Chloe had teased her. Live a little. And Emily had listened. Pulling into her driveway, Chloe sat in the car for a moment, staring at the darkening sky. The quiet felt heavier than usual, pressing against her ribs. Finally, she whispered to herself, "This isn't like her." Inside, she kicked off her shoes and went straight to her laptop. She opened the dating app Emily had mentioned weeks ago, scrolling through conversations. She had laughed about a man named Daniel, though Chloe had never seen his profile. Maybe, just maybe, the stranger held the missing piece. Her phone buzzed on the desk. For a split second, hope surged through her chest. But it was only a pharmacy reminder. No name. No Emily. Chloe exhaled shakily, rubbing her temples. Tomorrow, she decided, she'd dig deeper. If Emily wouldn't answer, she'd find someone who could. As she closed her laptop, the unanswered message glowed faintly on her phone screen, and the silence stretching like a shadow that refused to break. By the next day, the silence would no longer be just unsettling. It would become the first undeniable sign that Emily was gone. The morning after Emily's unexplained absence, Chloe sat hunched over her kitchen table, a half-empty mug of coffee growing cold in front of her. She hadn't slept properly. Every time she closed her eyes, her mind replayed Emily's last message. It was good. He's interesting. We'll call tomorrow. The promise now felt like a cruel ghost. She unlocked her phone and scrolled back through their recent conversations, searching for something she might have missed. A detail, a name, anything. And then it came to her, a faint recollection from weeks ago. Emily had mentioned chatting with a guy from a dating app. His name had stuck out because it was so ordinary, so harmless. Daniel. Chloe whispered it aloud, as if testing its weight. Ordinary names had a way of hiding extraordinary dangers. By mid-morning, Chloe could no longer fight the dread pressing down on her chest. She called the local police station and reported her friend missing. At first, the officer on the other end spoke with the weary patience reserved for worried friends. Maybe Emily needed space. Maybe she was staying with someone. Maybe she just forgot to check in. But when Chloe mentioned her spotless work record, the unanswered calls, and the date with a stranger, the tone shifted. A report was filed. Detectives arrived at Emily's apartment by afternoon. Chloe followed them inside, her stomach tight. Everything looked ordinary. The bed was made, the dress she had worn to dinner draped neatly on the chair, her shoes lined by the door. There were no signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no scattered belongings. Just absence, stretched thin across the walls. One of the detectives, a tall man named Harris, flipped open a small notebook. "You said she met someone from an app?" Chloe nodded quickly. "Yes. His name's Daniel. That's all I know. She only mentioned him once or twice, but she said she was meeting him last night." "Did she share his last name?" "No." Chloe's throat tightened. "Just Daniel." The detectives exchanged a look, subtle but sharp. They asked for Emily's phone records, her laptop, any device that could give them a trail. Chloe helped them gather what they could, though the emptiness of the apartment gnawed at her. Emily's phone was missing. Her purse, too. Later that evening, Harris called Chloe back into the station. They had begun tracing Emily's movements. Surveillance cameras confirmed her entering the restaurant around 8 p.m. with a tall man, well-dressed, smiling. They left together a little after 10. From there, the trail grew murkier. "Daniel," Harris repeated, tapping his pen against the table. "We're running his profile, but so far, nothing matches." Chloe frowned. "What do you mean, nothing? You saw him with her." "We see a man," Harris corrected. "But online, the account he used doesn't exist anymore. The messages vanished. The profile's been deleted. No email trail, no phone number linked. It's as if he was never there." The words hollowed Chloe's chest. She gripped the edge of the chair, whispering, "So what was he? Just a ghost?" The detective's eyes darkened. "Not a ghost. Someone who doesn't want to be found." Chloe left the station that night with a knot of fear in her stomach. The city lights blurred as she drove home, the weight of Emily's disappearance pressing heavier than ever. Every corner of her mind replayed the same thought. She had laughed with Emily about this man, teased her about finally taking a chance. And now that chance had swallowed her whole. Back in her apartment, Chloe sat in silence, staring at her phone. She typed Daniel's name into every search bar she could find: social media, news articles, online forums. Dozens of Daniels appeared, but none matched the face from the grainy restaurant otage the detectives had shown her. That face, the smile so convincing, the posture so sure, seemed to belong to no one at all. She slammed the laptop shut, her pulse quickening. Somewhere out there was a man named Daniel who had walked into Emily's life and erased himself just as easily. By the next day, detectives would knock on his apartment door and discover that neat rooms and polite lies can hide the darkest truths. Detective Harris stood outside the door of apartment 3B with his partner, a younger officer named Miller, clipboard tucked under his arm. The hallway smelled faintly of old carpet and paint thinner, the kind of building that tried to look respectable but always seemed tired around the edges. Harris raised his hand and knocked. For a moment there was only silence. Then, footsteps. The lock clicked, and the door creaked open. Daniel. The man from the restaurant footage appeared in the doorway, taller than the camera suggested, immaculately groomed, his smile practiced and calm. "Officers," he said, voice steady. "Can I help you?" Harris flashed his badge. "Detective Harris, this is Detective Miller. We're following up on a missing person report. Emily Parker. We have reason to believe you were the last to see her." Daniel's brow furrowed just enough to look concerned without overplaying it. "Emily?" "Yes, we had dinner. Lovely woman. But she left afterward. I assumed she went home." "May we come in?" Harris asked. A pause. Barely noticeable, but there. Then Daniel stepped aside. "Of course." The apartment was spotless. Too spotless. Minimalist furniture, everything in its place. The air carried a faint, sharp tang. Bleach, masked with citrus cleaner. Harris's gaze sharpened. People cleaned, yes, but they didn't scrub their apartments within hours of a date. Miller scanned the space quickly, eyes narrowing at the uniformity of the decor. No clutter, no photographs, no life. Harris's attention fixed on the coffee table. A single glass sat near the edge, faint lipstick smudged on the rim. He leaned closer, the evidence unmistakable. Emily had been here. "You live alone?" Harris asked casually. Daniel nodded. "Yes, just me." "No roommates? No visitors?" "None." The answer came too quickly, too rehearsed. Harris stepped further inside, his detective's instinct prickling. Every surface gleamed, but there was a strange coldness to it, as if the apartment was staged rather than lived in. No books left open, no jacket tossed carelessly, no shoes by the door. Even the kitchen counters were bare, except for a drying rack lined with neatly washed utensils. "Mind if we take a look around?" Harris asked. Daniel's lips pressed together for a second, then parted in another polite smile. "If it helps." They moved through the rooms. The bedroom was pristine, the bed tucked in with hospital corner precision. The bathroom smelled of bleach strongest of all. Harris noted the faint streaks on the tile, as though something had been scrubbed furiously, hurriedly. Back in the living room, Miller crouched near a small trash bin. Empty. Too empty. No receipts, no packaging, not even tissues. People-generated debris. But Daniel, apparently, did not. Harris returned his gaze to their host. "So, after dinner, you didn't accompany Emily anywhere else?" "No," Daniel said smoothly. "She said she was tired. I offered her a ride, but she declined. She left in her car." Harris studied him. The man's calmness was unnerving. No nervous tics, no shifting eyes, just a steady, practiced composure, as though he'd anticipated every question. Yet the glass remained on the table, her lipstick marking his lie. Miller broke the silence. "Do you mind if we take this with us?" Daniel glanced at the glass, hesitated, then nodded. "If it helps you." Harris placed it carefully into an evidence bag. His gut screamed that the neatness, the bleach, the emptiness, none of it was coincidence. The apartment was not clean because Daniel valued tidiness. It was clean because something messy had happened here, something messy he could not allow them to see. As they stepped back into the hallway, Daniel lingered at the door, smiling politely. "I hope you find her." The door shut with a quiet click, leaving Harris staring at the number 3B etched in dull brass. Miller shifted uneasily. "That guy gives me chills." Place felt like a showroom. Harris didn't reply immediately. He was thinking of the lipstick stain, of the bathroom's sharp bleach odor, of the missing clutter that made a home human. He finally muttered, "We're not dealing with a showroom. We're dealing with someone who doesn't want us to know who he really is." They walked down the hallway, their footsteps echoing. Harris's jaw tightened. There was more beneath Daniel's polished surface. A history, a truth buried deep. That night, Chloe sat on the edge of her bed, her phone clutched tightly in both hands. The detective's visit replayed in her mind. The apartment, the man's name, the eerie calmness in every answer. Harris's warning voice echoed, "We're not dealing with someone ordinary." But all Chloe could hear beneath it was her own voice, days earlier, teasing Emily. "You need to stop hiding behind work, Em. Go out. Live a little." The words stung now, sharp as glass. She had said them with laughter, believing she was encouraging her friend to shake off loneliness. But in the silence that surrounded her now, they felt like a sentence handed down, one Chloe could never take back. She leaned back against the headboard, staring at the ceiling. Her thoughts dragged her into memory. Emily, sitting across the table at their favorite cafe, hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea. Her smile had been soft but weary, her eyes carrying the kind of exhaustion that no amount of sleep could erase. "I'm just tired, Chloe," she'd said quietly. "It's like my life is work, and then it's nothing. I come home to silence. I'm scared that's all I'll ever have." Chloe Hattum had reached across, touching her hand. "You won't. You're too good, too kind. You'll find someone. You have to take the risk." Now those words twisted into a cruel echo. She had pushed Emily toward risk, and Emily had listened. Tears pricked Chloe's eyes. She pressed her palms against them, but the memories kept coming. Emily's laughter at the movies, the way she hummed absent-mindedly when she cooked, the fierce way she defended patience at work. Little fragments of a life too vibrant to simply vanish. Her phone buzzed suddenly, startling her. For half a second, her heart leapt, but it was only a message from another nurse checking if she had heard anything new. Chloe typed back quickly. No updates. Still nothing. Still nothing. The weight of those 2 words pressed heavily against her chest. She thought of Emily's last text. It was good. He's interesting. We'll call tomorrow. Such a simple promise. Such a devastating lie of circumstance. Chloe curled into herself, rocking slightly. Guilt gnawed at her from every angle. If she hadn't teased, if she hadn't pushed, if she had just gone with Emily that night, insisted on being there, maybe things would be different. Maybe her best friend wouldn't be a name on a missing person report. The silence of the apartment wrapped around her, thick and suffocating. She glanced toward the corner of the room where a framed photo of them sat, Emily's arm around her shoulder, both of them laughing, their eyes bright with a joy that now felt foreign. Chloe whispered into the emptiness, "I'm so sorry, Em. I should have protected you." The words broke her, tears spilling freely down her cheeks. She wiped them away with shaking hands, but the ache remained. Somewhere Emily was out there, lost, alone, maybe worse. And Chloe couldn't shake the feeling that it was her fault. As the night deepened, Chloe sat upright, determination hardening beneath her grief. If the detectives couldn't find Emily, she would. She owed her that much. Guilt might drown her, but it would not paralyze her. The following morning, Detective Harris sat in a dimly lit room at the precinct, his eyes fixed on the grainy black and white feed flickering across the monitor. Chloe sat beside him, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone pale. "Here," Harris said, pointing to the timestamp. "This is 8:02 p.m. Emily and Daniel leaving the restaurant." The footage rolled. Emily walked beside Daniel, her coat draped over one arm, her smile soft but cautious. Daniel, in contrast, radiated ease, his hand hovering just close enough to suggest intimacy without crossing boundaries. To an outsider, they looked like a couple in the early spark of romance. Chloe leaned forward, her throat tight. "She looks happy." The words sounded fragile, as though saying them aloud might shatter the illusion. Harris studied the screen. Happiness can be a mask. The footage continued, showing them strolling down the block until they disappeared beyond the camera's reach. Harris paused, rewound, played again. He wasn't watching Emily's smile. He was watching Daniel's eyes. Calculating, sharp, always scanning the environment. A man alert not to company but to opportunity. Hours later, another camera picked up Emily's figure. This time, she was alone with Daniel just a step behind her. The timestamp read 12:41 a.m. They were on a deserted street corner, dim light spilling weakly from a flickering lamp above. Emily's body language had changed, shoulders hunched, her movements hurried. She glanced over her shoulder, lips parting as though to speak, but the footage had no sound. Daniel closed the space between them. Emily stepped sideways, uncomfortable, distressed. "Pause it," Chloe whispered. Her chest rose and fell too quickly, panic pressing against her ribs. "She looks scared. Look at her face. She's scared." Harris froze the frame. Emily's eyes wide, her arm pull. Ding back. Daniel's hand stretched toward her, half a second from contact, and then, abruptly, the footage cut to black. Chloe gasped, shaking her head. No, that can't be all. Where's the rest?" Harris rewound, fast-forwarded, replayed. Each time, the same sudden ending. A missing chunk of time. "The feed was tampered with," Harris muttered. "Or the camera conveniently failed at the exact moment we needed it most." Chloe buried her face in her hands, fighting tears. "So that's it? We don't know what happened after this?" Harris exhaled slowly, his jaw tight. Not yet. But this shows us two things. Emily didn't just vanish. Something happened that night, and Daniel was there when it did. Miller entered the room, holding a printed report. We traced the traffic cameras along the route near his apartment. No sign of her car. Either she never drove home or someone made sure the trail went cold. Chloe lifted her head, her eyes red. Then find him. Don't just let him sit in that spotless apartment pretending he knows nothing. He was the last person with her. Harris looked at her, seeing the fire beneath her grief. We will. But if we push too hard too soon, he'll shut down. We need to watch him, catch the cracks in his story. Men like Daniel always slip. Chloe swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the table. The frozen image of Emily's face, frightened, vulnerable, reaching the edge of something unseen, burned into her vision. She whispered to herself, I should have been there. Harris placed a hand on the evidence bag beside him, the one holding the glass with Emily's lipstick stain. We've got enough to bring him in for questioning. Chloe stared at the monitor one last time, memorizing the trail of shadows her best friend had left behind, a smile fading into fear, a night collapsing into silence. When Daniel sat under the weight of interrogation lights, his charm would falter, and the truth hidden behind his careful mask would begin to leak through the cracks. The interrogation room was stark. A metal table, 2 chairs, and a single overhead light that cast Daniel's face into sharp relief. He sat with his hands folded neatly, posture impeccable, the picture of composure. His eyes, however, never settled. They darted between the detectives, the walls, the door, as if rehearsing an escape route in his mind. Detective Harris leaned forward, his voice calm but deliberate. Daniel, you understand why we asked you to come in. You were the last person seen with Emily Parker. Daniel offered a small, polite smile. Of course. I want to help in any way I can. Emily was wonderful company. We had dinner, walked a bit, and then she left. Left where? Detective Miller asked. She said she needed to get home. I offered to call her a cab, but she waved me off. That was the last I saw of her. His tone was smooth, conversational, the words rolling easily as though rehearsed. Harris slid a photo across the table, the surveillance still of Emily at the street corner, her face tense, Daniel's hand stretching toward her. Is this what you mean by leaving? For a moment, Daniel didn't blink. Then his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and a faint twitch pulled at the corner of his left eye. He forced a laugh, low and casual. Yes, well, cameras catch strange angles. I was just reaching out to steady her. She stumbled on the curb. Poor girl. Miller's eyes narrowed. She looks frightened. Daniel tilted his head, the smile never quite reaching his eyes. Frightened? Of me? That's absurd. We had a great evening. You can even check the restaurant staff. They'll tell you she was laughing, enjoying herself. People can laugh and still be afraid, Harris said softly. The first time, Daniel's mask wavered. His lips pressed into a thin line, and his polished demeanor cracked just enough to let something darker seep through. Irritation, maybe even anger. You don't know her, he snapped, voice rising slightly before he reined it back in. She was different, special. She understood things others don't. I wouldn't hurt her. Chloe, waiting outside the observation window, pressed her hand against the glass. The shift in his tone pierced her chest. It wasn't just denial. It was ownership. Miller leaned in, voice sharp. Tell me, Daniel, if she left, why didn't she make it home? Why does the footage cut off right when you're with her? Daniel's gaze hardened. How should I know? Maybe your cameras failed. Maybe she decided to keep walking. Maybe she... He stopped, catching himself, then smoothed his tie with deliberate calm. All I can say is, she chose her own path. I respected that. Harris exchanged a glance with Miller. The twitching eye, the sudden flare of defensiveness, the slip into obsession. It was all there. His mask of courtesy was fraying thread by thread. Finally, Harris placed his pen on the table. His voice was steady but cold. "Daniel, I think you know more than you're admitting. And I think Emily didn't just walk away from you that night." Daniel's fingers tapped the table in a restless rhythm. His smile returned, thin and brittle. "Detective, you're chasing shadows. I suggest you find the real threat out there instead of wasting time on me." But as he stood to leave, escorted by an officer, Chloe caught one last glimpse of his face through the observation glass. The polite mask had fallen entirely for a fraction of a second. His expression was raw, jagged, not grief, not fear, but possession. She whispered to herself, voice trembling, "He's not done. Not yet." And she was right, because the deeper police dug into Daniel's life, the darker the truths they uncovered. Secrets that suggested Emily was not his first obsession, and perhaps not his last. The interrogation had ended, but Daniel's presence lingered in the precinct like a shadow that refused to lift. Detective Harris sat at his desk long after midnight, rifling through digital archives, his mind replaying that twitch in Daniel's eye, that brittle smile. He knew the mask would not hold forever. The next morning, a voice message lit up his phone. "Detective Harris, my name's Rachel. I think you're investigating someone I once knew. Daniel Hargrove." The voice trembled, raw with hesitation. "I don't want to get involved, but he's dangerous. Please call me back." Within an hour, Rachel sat across from Harris and Miller in the same room Daniel had occupied just days earlier. She was in her mid-30s, dressed neatly but carrying an exhaustion in her eyes that no makeup could conceal. Her hands fidgeted with a coffee cup, nails bitten to the quick. "I dated Daniel almost 10 years ago," she began softly. "At first he was perfect, charming, attentive, everything you dream about. But it shifted. He became possessive. If I didn't answer his calls right away, he'd show up outside my apartment. If I went out with friends, he'd accuse me of betraying him." Miller's pen scratched across his notebook. "Did he ever hurt you?" Rachel's lips pressed tight. "Not in the way you're asking, but the control, the manipulation, it was violence in its own right. I tried to leave him. That's when it got worse." Her voice cracked. "He told me no one else would ever want me, that I was his, always. I filed for a restraining order. He fought it with lawyers. Eventually his family settled and I disappeared from his world. But I always feared he'd find someone else to replace me." Harris exchanged a grave look with Miller. "And did he?" Rachel hesitated, her gaze falling to the tabletop. "There was a girl after me, Sophie. We met once. Daniel introduced her like he wanted me to see I'd been replaced. She was younger, naive. A year later I heard she moved away suddenly. No warning, no contact with friends, just gone." Chloe, sitting quietly in the corner, drew in a sharp breath. "Emily didn't just vanish. He's done this before." Rachel nodded, her voice breaking. "I believe he has. There was another name, too, Maya. She filed a police report, but it disappeared. Money talks, and Daniel's family has plenty of it." The room fell silent, the weight of Rachel's words pressing down on everyone present. The pattern was unmistakable, a trail of women swallowed by Daniel's charm, then erased from the record. Harris leaned forward. "Rachel, are you willing to put this in a sworn statement?" She hesitated, fear flickering in her eyes. "If I do, he'll know it's me. And Daniel doesn't forgive. He obsesses. That's what you need to understand. When he wants something, he doesn't let go. Ever. Chloe's voice was trembling but steady. That's exactly why we need you. Because Emily deserves someone to speak for her. Rachel closed her eyes, then gave a slow nod. I'll do it. I should have spoken out years ago. As she signed the statement, Harris felt the case shifting under his hands. The neat, polite man who had smiled across the interrogation table was no stranger to this darkness. He was steeped in it. Emily's disappearance wasn't a sudden act of violence. It was the culmination of a pattern buried in silence and sealed by money. Miller slid the folder shut. We've got history, motive, and a pattern. But we still don't have Emily. Chloe's gaze hardened, her grief sharpening into resolve. Then we dig deeper. If Rachel's right, Daniel left shadows behind before. Somewhere in those shadows, we'll find her. And as investigators pried open Daniel's past, they would uncover something even more chilling. Traces of other women's lives cut short, fragments of stories erased, secrets hidden in places no one dared to look until now. The search began at dawn. Mist clung low over the river like a shroud, curling around the skeletal branches that leaned over the water. Detective Harris stood at the bank, hands in his pockets, scanning the current as though it might speak if he stared long enough. Behind him, uniformed officers combed the shoreline with methodical precision, their boots sinking into damp earth. Rachel's testimony had given them direction. Daniel often brought women to quiet places where no one would interrupt him. The river was one of them. Chloe walked with Miller, her arms wrapped around herself against the cold. She hadn't wanted to come, but she couldn't bear the thought of waiting helplessly at home. She hated water, Chloe whispered. She wouldn't even swim in pools. If she came here with him, it wasn't by choice. Miller nodded grimly. Then we'll find something. People like Daniel always leave a trace. For hours, they found nothing. Just beer bottles, scraps of paper, and the indifferent rush of water. But then, near a bend in the river where the mud grew thick, an officer called out. "Detective, over here!" Harris hurried across the uneven ground. The officer knelt by the edge of the bank, pulling something from the muck with gloved hands. It was sodden, streaked with dirt, but unmistakable. A scarf. Pale blue, patterned with tiny embroidered daisies. Chloe's breath hitched. Her knees buckled. "That's hers," she whispered, the words trembling out of her. She staggered forward, reaching out as if to snatch it away from the officer. "That's Emily's scarf. She wore it that night." Miller caught her by the shoulders, steadying her as tears burned down her cheeks. "We'll handle it carefully, Chloe. I promise." Harris crouched beside the scarf, his chest heavy. It wasn't just a piece of clothing. It was a voice. A scream buried in the earth, finally forcing its way into daylight. "We'll send it to the lab," Harris said quietly. "Check for DNA, fibers, anything that ties it back to him." Chloe shook her head violently. "You don't need a lab. He did this. He brought her here." Her grief sharpened into fury, her voice breaking. "She trusted him. I told her to give him a chance, and now—" Her voice collapsed, swallowed by sobs. Miller guided her a few steps away, while Harris sealed the scarf in an evidence bag. Around them, the river kept flowing, indifferent to human suffering. It had hidden the truth for days, maybe longer. Now it whispered that more secrets could lie just beneath its surface. Chloe pressed her palms against her face. If that's all that's left of her, if we never find her, how do I live with that? Harris stepped closer, his voice low, steady. Don't think of it as the end. Think of it as the first thread. We pull it. We unravel everything he's tried to bury. Chloe dropped her hands, her eyes rimmed red but burning with anger. Then pull harder, because I won't stop until he pays. The team spread out, probing deeper into the mud, dragging nets through the shallow water. Every splash, every scrape of metal against stone carried the weight of dread. But aside from the scarf, the river kept its silence. As dusk fell, Harris ordered the search suspended. Officers packed up, their faces grim. Chloe stayed rooted in place, staring at the darkening water as if Emily might rise from its depths. Miller touched her arm gently. "We'll be back tomorrow. We're not done here." She nodded, but her voice was flat. "Neither is he." Harris glanced back at the evidence bag dangling from his hand. A scrap of fabric, fragile yet damning. It was enough to confirm Emily's path had ended in violence, enough to tighten the noose around Daniel. But as Harris looked at the river one last time, he felt the hollow certainty settle in his This water had swallowed more than just a scarf, and soon the river would give up more of its secrets, secrets that would force Daniel's world to collapse, one truth at a time. The morning of the arrest arrived like a storm breaking. Detectives Harris and Miller stood outside Daniel's apartment as officers pounded on the door. The lock clicked, and Daniel appeared in the frame, pressed shirt, composed posture, as though expecting guests rather than handcuffs. "Daniel Hargrove," Harris said, voice firm. "You're under arrest for the disappearance of Emily Parker." Daniel didn't resist. He merely tilted his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "You're making a mistake." The cuffs clicked around his wrists, the cold metal gleaming in the pale light. Weeks later, the courtroom brimmed with tension. Reporters lined the benches, notebooks poised. The public leaned forward, hungry for answers, for justice. Chloe sat among the spectators, her body rigid, hands trembling in her lap. When the guards escorted Daniel inside, the room seemed to hold its breath. He walked with the same immaculate posture, his suit crisp, his hair neatly combed. But it was his eyes that unsettled Chloe most. Calm, confident, as if he were the one in control. Their eyes locked across the room. Chloe's throat tightened. For a fleeting second, it felt like she was back at the riverbank, staring into an abyss. Daniel's smile widened just enough to cut through her resolve. It wasn't warmth. It was possession, as though he still claimed Emily even in chains. The prosecution laid out its case methodically. Surveillance footage of Emily at the street corner. The scarf dredged from the riverbank. Rachel's sworn statement about his past obsessions, financial records showing hush money settlements to former partners. Piece by piece, the facade of Daniel's respectability crumbled. Chloe clutched the edge of her seat, her heart pounding as the evidence piled higher. Every detail was another echo of Emily's last night, another reminder that she hadn't simply vanished. She had been conned, assumed, but the defense was ruthless. Without a body, they argued, the case was circumstantial. The scarf could have been planted. The testimony of ex-girlfriends? Biased. Vindictive. Daniel's attorney painted him as a man wronged by gossip, a scapegoat for a grieving city desperate for closure. When Rachel took the stand, Chloe held her breath. Rachel's voice shook as she recounted her story, the obsession, the control, the fear. Daniel sat across from her, expression unchanging, that same faint smile never slipping. Only once, when Rachel's voice cracked, did his eyes flicker, like a predator scenting weakness. Chloe whispered under her breath, "Don't look at him. Don't give him that power." Harris testified next, his words measured but unyielding. "In my 20 years as a detective, I've seen patterns. This isn't coincidence. This is escalation." Yet, as the trial stretched on, Chloe felt the ground shifting beneath her. Jurors exchanged wary glances. Without Emily's body, doubt slithered in. Could they truly convict a man of murder without the ultimate proof? During recess, Daniel glanced back at Chloe once more. That stare cut through the noise of the courtroom, through the chatter of lawyers and the shuffle of papers. His lips curved into that same calm, unnerving smile. It wasn't arrogance alone. It was a message. You can't touch me. She's gone. And so is your proof. Chloe's nails dug into her palms, blood rising beneath her skin. Fury surged where grief had lived for weeks. She whispered fiercely, "You're wrong. She's still here, and I won't let you erase her." The gavel struck, calling the court back to order. Both sides prepared for the final stretch. Truth stood tall but fragile, weighed against shadows carefully spun. And as the trial inched toward its conclusion, Chloe knew one thing with brutal certainty. Whether justice won or not, the war between them was far from over. Because Daniel still had secrets, and the final revelation would decide whether Emily's story ended in silence or injustice. The courtroom, so heavy with shadows of crime and accusation, softened when Emily's name returned not as a victim, but as a person. The prosecution shifted strategy, calling those who had known her, not to dissect evidence, but to breathe life back into the woman whose absence filled every corner of the room. Chloe was first. She took the stand with trembling hands, clutching a photo of Emily in her nursing scrubs, hair tied back, that familiar grin shining despite exhaustion. "This was her," Chloe said, voice cracking. "Always smiling, always giving more of herself than she had. She'd work double shifts just so another nurse could go home to their kids. That's who Emily was." Jurors leaned forward, listening. For a moment, the sterile air shifted into warmth, into the memory of someone real. Next came Mrs. Parker, Emily's mother. Her voice was quiet, broken but steady. "She wanted a family of her own one day. She told me once she wanted 3 children, because 2 felt lonely. She loved to paint, though she never thought she was good. Her canvases are still stacked in her closet, bright colors, wild skies." She paused, tears catching her throat. "When she laughed, the whole house laughed with her." The defense objected, irrelevant, emotional testimony, but the judge allowed it. Relevance wasn't just measured in hard facts. Sometimes it was measured in the truth of a life stolen too soon. Harris himself spoke briefly, not as a detective, but as a man who had come to know Emily through fragments. Her messages, her routines, the way her friends described her stubborn kindness. "I never met her alive," he admitted, "but I know the outline of her days. She cared about people. That care deserved safety in return." Chloe, listening, closed her eyes. Each word felt like a stitch, sewing Emily back together in memory, even as the reality of her loss remained raw. Daniel sat still, intently, his composure unbroken. But his smile, so steady before, had dimmed. He didn't look at the witnesses. Instead, he stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, as though refusing to acknowledge the life he had tried to erase. The testimonies became a chorus, echoing Emily's laughter, her generosity, her humanity. It was no longer just about what Daniel had done. It was about who Emily had been, and the cruel arrogance of someone believing they could reduce her to silence. For Chloe, the hardest part came when the prosecutor played a short clip from Emily's phone, a video sent weeks earlier. Emily sitting in Chloe's kitchen, hair loose, laughing as she teased her friend. The sound filled the courtroom, rich and alive, so close it hurt. Chloe bit her lip until she tasted blood. Around her, jurors blinked back tears. The judge's gavel came down softly, not to silence the room but to steady it. When the video ended, silence fell heavy. It wasn't the silence of loss anymore. It was the silence of recognition, that Emily was more than evidence, more than a victim. She was a life denied its future. Chloe lifted her chin, strength flickering in her grief. This is how she wins, she thought, by refusing to disappear. And as closing arguments loomed, it became clear. The case was no longer only about guilt or innocence. It was about Emily's voice echoing loud enough to drown Daniel's shadows. The courtroom was silent, save for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Hours had passed since the closing arguments, each one circling the same question. Could a man be condemned without a body? The jurors filed back in, their faces grave, eyes avoiding Daniel's calm expression. Chloe gripped the edge of her bench so tightly her knuckles whitened. This was it, the moment when hope and dread would collapse into truth. The judge asked the foreman if a verdict had been reached. A pause, then the words, "We find the defendant, Daniel Harker, guilty of second-degree murder." The air cracked open. Gasps rippled through the room, some of relief, some of disbelief. Mrs. Parker buried her face in her hands, sobbing quietly. Chloe let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, though it didn't feel like victory. Daniel sat motionless, only the faintest tremor in his jaw betraying his composure. His mask had cracked long ago, yet he still clung to the illusion of control. The judge's gavel struck once, sealing his fate. Daniel was sentenced to 30 years in prison without parole, a punishment, but not a restoration. As he was led away in shackles, he turned his head, just slightly, just enough to lock eyes with Chloe. There was no plea, no apology, only that same unnerving calm. For the first time, Chloe realized he didn't need freedom to feel powerful. His power came from absence, from the fact that Emily's body had never been found, from the hollow truth that the full story would remain buried beneath shadows. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, cameras flashed, microphones pushed forward, questions hurled into the damp autumn air. Do you feel justice was served? What do you say to women still meeting strangers online? Do you believe Emily is truly gone? Chloe had no answers. Her throat felt raw, as if every word she could speak belonged to Emily instead. She slipped past the crowd, retreating to the quiet corner of the courthouse steps where Mrs. Parker clutched a small framed photo of her daughter. Together they stood in silence, two women bound by grief and memory, knowing no sentence could ever give them back what mattered most. In the weeks that followed, life moved on for everyone else. Headlines shifted to new scandals, new tragedies. Daniel's trial became just another story in the endless churn of crime reports. But for Chloe, time froze. Nights were restless, haunted by the sound of Emily's laughter replaying in her mind. She found herself dialing her friend's number, only to hear the automated message. The subscriber you are trying to reach is unavailable. Emily had disappeared forever. Not just from the world, but from the rituals of daily life. No more surprise calls, no more late-night snacks after shifts, no more teasing jokes about Chloe's messy kitchen. Her absence was a constant presence, louder than any voice. Sometimes Chloe wandered to the riverbank where Emily's scarf had been found. She would sit on the damp grass, staring at the water's endless current. It carried secrets away, swallowing evidence, erasing certainty. She wondered if somewhere beneath its surface lay the final piece of Emily's story, or if Daniel had scattered those pieces so carefully that they would never be retrieved. The hardest part was not the verdict, not even the loss. It was the silence. No grave to visit, no place to lay flowers, no body to honor. Just a vanishing that lingered like smoke, impossible to grasp, impossible to let go. Chloe began to write in a notebook Emily had once gifted her, scribbling fragments of memory. The way Emily hummed when nervous, the scent of her vanilla lotion, the fierce loyalty that made her irreplaceable. If the world could not have Emily's presence, it could at least have her echo. And yet, every word Chloe wrote carried the same haunting truth. Closure would never come. Some disappearances are final, not because they end, but because they suspend everything in midair, leaving the living to endure the weight of unanswered questions. As autumn deepened into winter, Chloe whispered a vow into the cold night air. You are not gone, Emily, not while I remember. But memory was both a gift and a prison. For though Daniel sat behind bars, Emily remained vanished, her story forever incomplete, her laughter forever cut short. The world had its verdict. Chloe had only her grief. And somewhere in the silence between truth and shadow, Emily lingered, disappeared forever, but never forgotten.